Zero Foxtrot does not profess to share or promote the opinions and beliefs expressed by show host or guests. The Stay Zero podcast was created to provide a platform for servicemen and women to share their stories. Due to the nature of this podcast, sensitive topics will arise. Conversations about combat, PTSD, drug use, and other such subjects will occur. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the Stay Zero podcast. I have Adam Hughes here with me today. Thanks for coming in, man.
Not a problem.
And you were in the Army. You spent some time, you were working with the FMWR.
Correct.
Which is the Family Morale, Welfare, and Recreation Department. And then spent some time as a global consultant, right? And thanks for coming in, man.
Latin for fire. Not a problem.
Oh, okay. Nice. Let's start with your time in the Army. Tell me about, what your role was and what that FMWR department was.
We can start the story with how I joined the military, which was, might as well start the story right. And it was a drunken night. And my buddy Matt, who had kind of like my little brother, always has been, always will be, grew up with him. He had come back off a deployment from 9/11 era. Yeah. He was an MP and obviously kicked in some doors and did some difficult things as a dog handler, and really got in the mix with some pretty hefty stuff. And once he got back, we had some pretty intimate conversations over a few libations, and I think that ended up in a situation where we made a bet. Whether or not I was going to get a higher ASVAB score than him, which, Matt, I hate to say this, but we always knew I was going to get a higher ASVAB score. But anyways, long story short, his uncle convinced me that I was going to go be a pilot. So I decided to do that and called up the recruiter happy as heck that I was going to go be a Cobra pilot. And the recruiter let me show up and then told me we haven't flown Cobras since the Vietnam era. So went through the entire process, got down to MEPS, and then got told that the Army doesn't allow civilian applications for warrant officers to fly helicopters.
Really?
At the time, they had changed the regulation. And so they said, but we got this great other option for you. We're going to make you an 18 X-ray. And so I went through that process, did my due, got injured, and ended up in Korea, of all places, after a lot of moving and shaking, and changing a lot of lives in weird places. But
what were you doing in Korea?
So I got restationed in Korea, ended up in a unit in Korea, and that is kind of a lot of the story for the rest of my life as well. I ended up in a unit, 218A, for all those out there. I was not an air defender, but ended up there. And Sergeant Major Foley was the battalion commander, command sergeant major there, and Colonel Rose, Colonel Skaggs at the beginning. Spent some time there, and I ended up kind of being a little bit of an intermediary between a 54-year-old first sergeant and a 26-year-old commander.
Oh, shit.
So you can imagine how that went over. So it was an interesting dynamic, and I learned a lot in that position. And the first sergeant, who I was always told I was his mini-me, because we both had shaved heads, and he was probably just a foot taller than me, and really, I could have been his son, First Sergeant Rao. And anyway, he walked out one day and he said, "Hey, you got a meeting at 1300. You got to go to this boss meeting." I had no idea what boss was. Didn't want to know what it was. It was an additional duty. I wasn't about additional duties. I already had plenty on my plate. As IASO, NCOIC for, the company, legal NCOIC, all that. And so I didn't need any other additional tasks. And then,
what did the boss thing turn out to be? What was that?
So boss is better opportunities for single soldiers. And we can kind of break that down once I got to the political and the highest rank in that organization. But I would start off at the local level, Camp Carroll, which is the only installation in the United States arsenal where the AFI's coined shirt says, "Where the expletive is Camp Carroll, Korea," and it has like a Barney Fife looking guy on it. You know, everybody else, the Great Place, right?
Yeah.
All those different names, but this was, you know, where is Camp Carroll. So got engaged with the Better Opportunities for Single Soldiers program, not by choice, and everybody's usually voluntold to get engaged. It is a program based off community service, recreation, and quality of life, which is really the main pillar there. And those are for single soldiers or service members. And really, they're supposed to be an advocacy group on an installation. There's a lot of misconceptions about how it was started. Back in '89, Sergeant Major of the Army, Julius Gates at the time. And the Army had just come out with like the Army Family Action Plan and, you know, the Army family, the whole concept of family, you know, beating people over the head with the dependents. And the general concern of single soldiers was that single soldiers got forgotten in the planning process of the Army Family Action Plan. And so the Sergeant Major of the Army at the time, Sergeant Major of the Army Julius Gates, made a promise, and they started what was at that time called the Single Soldier Quality of Life Initiative, which is a big, long name. And what they wanted to do is it was supposed to be a vehicle for the voice of the single soldier to get kind of circumnavigate command, and it just didn't work out. And I mean, great intent. I'm not saying that it didn't work, but what happened is you had first sergeants and it really initially started in Germany. The soldiers thought it was a get the first sergeant out of the barracks program, and the first sergeant thought it was you're just going to stop at, you know, basically the soldiers drawing a line in the sand. So there was a massive, it created a dichotomy that just did not work. And so
were they just oppositional?
Right. I mean, it's the us and them, you know, the haves and have-nots. And then, you know, really, unfortunately, the soldiers took that, you know, centimeter and ran for 800 miles with it. Right. I mean,
they would.
You give a private any problem and they will figure out how to get around it. Right.
Yeah, sure.
And so, or figure it out. Just like at Aberdeen Proving Grounds and the pizza boxes in the ceiling tiles of training units. Just putting that out there. But,
what is that?
Oh, that was, I ended up as a student first sergeant, and for all those people that still hate me, for taking the cell phones on a 4-day weekend, for a long 4-day weekend, they would not stop taking their cell phones to the schoolhouse. And so we did side straddle hops with their pants and boots and sleeves undressed until we got 86 cell phones out of a 400-person formation. And then they went for their 4-day and they didn't have their cell phones. I still get messages. But I actually was doing a town hall at Fort Campbell, and I had a kid walk up to me, or private.
I
remember you, First Sergeant Hughes.
You bastard.
Oh my gosh. Anyways, and so to kind of cut all the junk, the whole premise of the Single Soldier Quality of Life program was really to give a vehicle for those soldiers to at least say, hey, we've got black mold, but that's black mold, not black spray paint, right? Okay. I mean, there's a big difference. And then, but on top of that, you know, you start looking at what are the quality of life aspects for a single service member or a single soldier, you know, the dining facilities, the barracks, you know, what are those aspects? And, anyways, there was at that time a decision that was made to pitch the coin to FMWR, which is what it was called then. Obviously, that's been shortened now. It's just MWR, or the G9 is what the, you know, code name is, and it's housed by itself within MCOM, kind of a parent to the side, but they encompass everything on post, basically, that isn't owned by the military lines of effort. So schools, clubs, gyms, all those buildings that are anything outside of a military unit, basically is MWR. That's the easiest way to say it.
Okay.
And so it's everything outside the mission, truly. And so what happened was they took that, assigned it some cash, gave it a little bit of effort, and said, okay, maybe we utilize this Family Morale, Welfare, and Recreation Command, or at the time, I think it was IMA, or it was, of course, the command names, I forget what the one it was at the time, but FMWRC, something to that extent, that realm. They gave them a funding line and a MIPR and said, here, take single soldiers out and get them to talk, right? Have a small installation-based town hall, figure out what's going on with them and what the problem is, and then we can hopefully fix that if you bring it to us and articulate the problem. And for those that are familiar with the AFAP process, or the Army Family Action Plan process, that's exactly what happens in the AFAP process. So the Single Soldier Quality of Life Initiative was that for single soldiers. Well, as things churn, it turned into free Travelocity, right?
Okay.
So
for who? The single soldiers?
Right. And that's where I think a lot of the program lost its weight.
Where were, like, you say Travelocity, I think of booking flights, booking. So single soldiers were able to book travel to go places?
I mean, we might as well just start throwing people under the bus. But so there was a...
Let's do it.
Back up over the top of this one. One of the best places on the planet, Fort Polk, Louisiana. When I had first gotten to San Antonio, which is where the MCOM's headquarters was, or it still is, we started looking at where some of the spending was being spent. And there were soldiers that were on taxpayer-funded buses going to casinos that were being given $500 Visa gift cards to spend inside the casinos. And that was their format of recreation to get a response out of this. I mean, one, I don't know what response you're going to get out of single soldiers other than, woo! And two, that's not a taxpayer responsibility. And so I had a big problem.
Funding gambling is,
I mean, anybody
win?
It's a funny story because I'm going to say something else too. So when I had gotten into that position, and really, at the time, the Sergeant Major of the Army, Chandler, when I first got in the seat as the Department of the Army Single Soldier Representative, or what everybody else would want to call me, I changed the name because I couldn't stand it. But they would want to call me the DA Boss Representative, and I couldn't stand it. So I wanted a title for what I was actually doing, and it was my job to represent single soldiers and then service members, because the Army foots the bill for most of the other branches on a lot of the other installations. So I had to know every branch of the service, and we had to know what the real problems were. Well, when you start getting into that, I mean, anyways, Sergeant Major of the Army Chandler came back and said, tell me what the hell the program is doing, because nobody thinks it's doing anything, and it's a huge waste of money. I mean, he might not have said that verbatim, but that's exactly what everybody knew. What he was tasking me to do is tell me the story, because there's no story. And it's been that way.
This whole program.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They had gotten another block of money in the early 2000s. And I mean, they had sat on most of it. And a lot of that money was getting skirted to other programs, to libraries underneath the guise of, well, we need to pay for the single soldiers' lunches that are coming to read at the libraries. And I very blatantly said, if you can give me a list of 1 to 10 soldiers on an installation, I think maybe we can talk about some funding. But until that day,
quick, send somebody to read to kids.
Right. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
You're like Doge 1.0.
And it was not popular then either.
It ain't popular now. Well, I mean, I guess who you ask.
And so, it was a necessity to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, when I got into the position, there wasn't even a roster. And that wasn't because of my predecessors. I can only imagine the uphill battles that there were a few before me that I don't want to. They know who they are, but it was definitely not their fault, right? And I definitely was willing to be the bastion and the whipping boy, and I was, and I probably why I drank so
Did you
much.
piss a lot of people off
I did.
auditing that program?
Oh, well, the first thing that happened is as soon as I went outside the purview because my background is in marketing and design. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to set up an independent website. So I set up the bo4ss.com and I made sure I wasn't collecting any PII or location information. I said, here's an event publisher tool. It's just like our own internal Facebook. Send me a few pictures and send me your budget and because I needed to be able to tell the Sergeant Major of the Army, hey, this is what we've been doing around the globe because nobody else was telling that story. And we definitely didn't want to look at Facebook to try and tell the story. And so this was really before, this is the early teens.
Okay.
So, 13, 14. And I'll never forget Jay Bear, Elmendorf Richardson. One of the first event comes back. We get the pictures. One, they're playing cornhole. Two, it's an event that's MWR sponsored with marketing and on social media, Facebook. And the pictures we get and video are of cornhole while drinking. And this is in the pictures. Then you get the winner of the cornhole event with cash that he won that was distributed by an Air Force individual. And the highlight of the event publisher post is the cash being waved and blown on. Right? Like, what are you doing? And why are you sending this all the way to the top? Which the thing is it needed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we get, in situations in life. I mean, we all make mistakes. I trust and believe I have made a plethora of mistakes, but that's why I've grown. Right. And we have to understand those mistakes to be able to move forward and make progress. Conflict makes progress. And, if you can't see through the weeds in that, then, or,
the utility in it.
It's just,
it's necessary.
It's unfortunate that there's so much guff when you get into that. And especially within this expectation, like, keep your mouth shut, dude, and I mean, hey, it is what it is. I mean, they're not paying my bills anymore. And, they're especially in the world that we're operating in right now. There's a lot of realities that soldiers don't know. I think one of the hardest things for me in that position and was that about 6 months after when I first got to San Antonio and got into that, the highest echelon realm, was in the political realm of the Department of the Army and operating at the highest echelon amongst the seniors, right? Kind of almost direct reporting, to a direct report to the Sergeant Major of the Army. I mean, I sat in a lot of rooms where there was no senior leadership from the military side, and the government civilians just ran rampant, talking truths. And then 15 minutes later, we had to convene for a decision point with a 3-star general, and it wasn't even a 180. I mean, I don't even know what the right degree that would be,
Can you give me an example of what something like?
It goes back to asking the right question. And that's always what it is. And, J.D. Thurman, General Thurman, when I was leaving Korea, I had the opportunity to sit down and have dinner with him intimately one night. And, very close hold dinner. And that was an opportunity given me by my mentor at the time, Sergeant Major Arnold. And he told me, he said, you know what, when you get to DC, one thing, never ask a question you don't know the answer to. And I know that is like, what?
Yeah. How would you find out anything you didn't already know?
Well, the thing is that way you can tell exactly who's going to lie to you. And I know that most of, general officers knew that, However, the tasking for the GO that was the commander of MCOM is a dual-hatted position. So he's also, he or her, maybe her in the future, that individual is dual-hatted. So they sit as the Assistant Chief of Staff of Installation Management, which is a policy position in DC. And then the money and the action arm is in San Antonio at MCOM. So it's always a situation where, well, the cat's away. And, you know, I mean, they're
the wait 'em out thing.
Wait 'em out. I mean, it was the first time I'd ever heard that term, and it didn't take me long to figure out what they meant.
Yeah.
You know,
explain that though. Like what?
Well, you know, I mean, everybody knows that general officer switches out maximum 3 years unless they're getting elevated for another reason. And so, you know, I saw it with General Ferreter, and you know, it drove me up the wall, and I had it maybe not as intimate as General Ferreter might have known at the time, but when I first went into the military, he was actually the commanding officer of the infantry school at Fort Benning. And so I felt like I came in the military under his command, so to speak, because that was the schoolhouse I went through at Charlie 150. And then I was at MCOM when he cased his colors as a 3-star. So that was, to me, kind of, I had a lot of allegiance to him. And I mean, to be completely frank, it really pissed me off. And I know Colonel Kalsrich, Colonel K.
You think they were just subverting what he wanted them to do, or? I mean,
it was just plainly, we don't like what he's saying, and we're not going to do what he's saying. But the way he handled it, and you know, there was a lot of, that was when I first learned how to navigate that type of a command, because I would end up meeting with him privately, you know, and that was abnormal, and it pissed a lot of people off. And even when it seemed like maybe there was a little bit of political blowback from that, then we took it outside of that realm where it wasn't as visible. But, and, you know, I don't want to put...
So he was aware as well that...
Oh, absolutely. But, I mean, and I don't want to say like I was his spy, but I mean, the thing is that there were so many things that were being discussed in, you know, the thing that I always hearken back to is in the movie Gladiator, when Joaquin Phoenix brings in, is it Diane Lane? I don't know who that, I forget who the actress is, but when he says, "What have you been up to? Busy little bee."
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's absolutely insane what goes on.
The beehive of DC.
Well, and it's not even just DC, because I mean, DC, you know, that's its own animal and its own beast. But the thing is that, you know, if you were to consider DC, Branson, Missouri, San Antonio is Vegas. And that's the truth. No matter what comments might end up on
there's
this.
a lot going on in San Antonio as well.
I mean, I don't know now, but I would say there's probably more money spent in San Antonio than in DC.
Really?
Well, and with the UFM, I mean, the Unified Fund Management Program is something that I'm not gonna get into specifics, but that's something that needs to be evaluated.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say hidden truths, but no one will tell you that's the laundry machine. But, you know, you could only imagine what you could do if you invested every DOD civilian's paycheck, if you got their entire annual pay up front on October 1st. What would you do with the money if you knew that you only had to pay them out at a certain rate throughout the year? You'd probably invest it.
A lot of interest being made.
Well, I mean, let's look at the fact here. You have, I mean, somebody can do this simple math. You can Google how many government employees are There are, and you can, an APF employees, not NAF, APF. And then you can Google their median pay rate, and then you can do the simple math. And if you get that in one lump sum, October 1st, you can do a lot.
Wow.
I mean, like, maybe at some point you could pay the national deficit.
Really?
Well, I mean,
are you comfortable saying what it is they were doing with it, or just
I mean, in principle, that's basically
investing it, like in the stock market and themselves and their own bank accounts?
Well, no. I think you could Google the situations that happened in San Antonio. I mean, there's one that wasn't too long ago that was $100 million that was somehow siphoned into a personal, bank account. That's not the only one. I mean, when I was going through the warrior transition process, there was an individual that was capitalizing. I don't want to say they were capitalizing on the warrior transition battalion. There was an individual that was basically taking donations from third parties outside the military. And these are all Googleable events. I'm not shedding light on anything that wasn't already out there. And I know that I'll get blowback. Like I said, I mean,
if it's already out there, it's already out there. But
right.
I mean, not everybody knows what's out there.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's
and knowing what to look for does help.
Right. I mean, and that's, one thing. And I mean, at some point, maybe we might want to edit this, but I'm just going to put it on tape just so that, and I'm not attacking this program because there's soldiers involved, but there is this thing called, are you familiar with the World Class Athlete Program? And I know I'm going to make a lot of friends right now.
No, I've never heard of that.
So they're the Army Olympians.
Okay.
But they're all officers. Most of them are officers. Frocked. Probably have to just let people kind of do the math on that one. And they're all stationed at Fort Carson, right next to the Olympic Training Center. The recruitment is an interesting process. The amount of money to send those people to Olympic events is an interesting amount of money.
Wow. Especially
the fact that it should be divided between recruiting command, not MCOM or the G9. So there's some functions there that...
yeah, man, with what's going on right now with Doge and just, I mean, it seems like everything where there's a dollar being moved has an exploit attached to it.
And I mean, again, I didn't come here to beat up San Antonio, but I mean, I can be completely honest. They're the reason, and I mean, that dynamic that is there and the disparity between soldiers and civilians at that command is the reason. I was the reason why I drank as much as I did. However, I mean, I didn't get there alone, and I definitely needed some motivation to drink that much and to keep myself sane. I mean, and I know that's a strange way to look at it, but there was so much visible, I looked at some of the senior leaders that I was around. I know I had some conversations with Colonel K, and I was like, what is going on here? And I just remember, sitting in some of the meetings with Colonel K, and I mean, people can look up Colonel K. Amazing man and an amazing leader. Chief of Staff for General Petraeus. I mean, definitely an action figure. Definitely. And,
okay.
And, you talk to some of the senior leaders that you'd sit down. General Rawhut had to explain to me how the money really worked. And he was one of the last, flag officers that was actually a finance officer. And I mean, you talk about a huge American soldier, an amazing man, Kurt Rawhut, retired general.
What did he tell you? How does the money work?
Oh man. Align with senior priorities and you'll get what you want. But
so it's all political.
Oh, 1,000%. And I mean, at that level, you're playing politics. It's not, you're not a soldier. I mean, for me, I was not a soldier. I was a politician. And I definitely, as much as I, talked to some of the people that were my eyes and ears on the installations, and, I had differing opinions about people not wearing uniforms and representing soldiers, because I think, I know I definitely had the opinion, and I didn't make very many friends by saying, you need to wear your uniform. When a lot of these individuals, the thought process was, well, because of the rank on my chest, I can't get into doors. And my thought process is, you know what? You want to know how I got my mentor's attention? The first time I had to go to one of those organized grab ass activities where we were supposed to present something as a military installation about how, we're getting together as a conference, as a group, a regional conference in Korea, and tell us all the good things you're doing. I mean, we showed up with a poster board, right? And I felt like I was in third grade. And I was supposed to be the one that was part of representatives. I was pissed. Like, why the hell did you drag me to Camp Casey from all the way down Area 4? You wasted my day. I'm supposed to take care of this, NCOIC stuff I got to do back at the unit. I'm going to have to do it whenever I get back to the military installation. And Sergeant Major Arnold, he was a garrison sergeant major, so he was responsible for the boss program. And I had a very candid moment with him afterwards, and he said, so what do you're new. How you doing? Niceties. And even at parade wrist, sitting there, and he goes, so what do you think about the boss program? And I said, honestly, Sergeant Major, your fucking boss program sucks. And he said, you know what? Fix it. And I did. And then I ended up taking the Department of the Army position, a year and a half later. And that's not like a success story. I had a lot of people tell me, it's career suicide.
What was
taking the position, because everybody saw the boss program as just a organized grab ass and a free travelocity. That was the opinion. And so once we realized what the problem was, then we set out to fix it. And then that's where the life skills came into play. And
was it just accountability and no oversight, so people didn't have any reason not to spend it on whatever the hell they wanted?
That was part of it.
Okay.
But there was also, I don't want to put it on the program manager when I got there, and they will go without being named. But there was definitely some lackadaisical processes. It was kind of like, well, my buddy sent me an email and they need some money at Fort Pick-a-Post.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send it to them. Get me a MIPper, Johnny,
All who you know, right?
Yeah. And then, and like I said, there was no call roster. There was no email roster of every single point of contact on every military installation. We had 75. Actually, when I got there, I think it was a little bit more than that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was 75 military installations, 27 countries, 15 time zones. You couldn't tell me who the president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, you couldn't even sometimes tell me who the MWR point of contact was, who was tasked with running that program on an installation. So how are you going to tell me that there was any accountability? That's asinine. If you can't even tell me who to call, there's no accountability. That's not accountability. That's just random fire, and there were installations that once I started reaching out, were like, yeah, who do we send those questions to about the quality of life complaints, which was a DA form. And it's supposed to go from like the lowest level all the way up and go to the Secretary of Defense if it needs to, and go to the GAO. It happened. When Chuck Hagel was a Secretary of Defense. There was a GAO packet that landed on my desk, and it wasn't really, I don't want to say it wasn't an issue, but for it to get to the GAO level, like that's an, oh my God, what the fuck is going on? Excuse my language, but I mean, that's a big issue. And for it to be a single soldier issue, and I mean, this is where a lot of my angst started with, I am not trying to browbeat the dependent concept here, but we can get into that and the disparity and the
tell me about that
funding.
disparity of what they were spending on a single soldier versus a dependent.
So when you really extrapolate the dollars and cents and you look at everything outside what we considered normal pay and benefits. So I'm not talking about their pay. I'm not talking about their benefits. I'm not talking about TRICARE. I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm talking about what does it cost for the single soldiers that actively engage in those MWR activities? How much money is spent on that, right? And so when you really break it out, and they have a system called RecTrack and Acro that you can check on that.
Okay.
But maybe people don't know that if you do the math backwards, you can figure out what's spent on those door swings, which is a resource driver there. And a system that they built to do the resource driving that's geared towards dependents. But for single service members, the average, and I'm just going to give a range. I know what it was, and this is 10 years ago almost. So
probably gone up.
I'm sure it's gone up and down. I highly doubt the numbers have gotten that much closer, but
and going down.
Let's just say probably between the $10 to $20 per soldier per day on additional benefits for single soldiers and single service members for those areas where we, spend money on other service branches. And then you get to dependents, and that's spouses and children. And I understand there's a mission there. And, while we're deployed, because we're so heavily deployed right now, while we're deployed, we need to take care of all those individuals. Well, there's 3 times as many dependents as there are single soldiers. And I know that nobody will ever agree with me eye to eye, but if you pull the numbers, you can find out the numbers between 60 and 65% of the force is single. That means unmarried or geographic bachelors. 60 to 65% of the force is single, and we're spending between $10 to $20 per day per soldier. And then we turn and we look at dependents, and it's above 300. I know that number has gone north.
Yeah.
There's no way it's gone south.
Yeah.
No one wants to talk about those numbers, and that's disgusting. And everybody wanted to know why I was so passionate, why I was such a heavy drinker. I mean, there's your answer. And so you're spending, if you really do the math, right, 9 times what's even thought of being spent at a minimum, right? The number's not 9, but I'm just saying, let's be conservative here for the benefit of the group. I mean, you want to talk about some Doge factors. I'm not going to get into individual things because there's some pretty crazy programs out there for a lot of different families. And I'm not going to make any friends by saying that, but I can tell you there's a lot of programs out there for families. And not to say that those aren't accessible to single service members, but like with the GAO investigation that landed on my desk, and I think the only reason why it had a lot of oomph behind the Secretary of Defense Hagel at the time was because he was the only ever enlisted Secretary of Defense. So he understood that dynamic, and he understood the pillow talk dynamic. And so he knew, like, hey, I need to give some big emphasis on this. And so,
Can you explain the pillow talk dynamic? Like why the dependents were getting so much and the single soldiers are really overlooked?
That's a pretty simple, and I mean, that's a family dynamic where a general officer has to go home, or I'm not going to single out general officers because it starts at the lowest level.
When most of the guys probably making decisions are married, right?
More than likely.
Yeah.
And so when they go home at night, they're not talking to soldiers. And I'm definitely not going to make any friends saying that. But I mean, they're going to focus on their family first. And that's one of the reasons why, I got to San Antonio and within days, it was like, oh, here, by the way, you have the chance to add any additional stuff to 600-20, which is the Army Command policy, right?
Okay.
If you want to add a section about single soldiers, maybe we can put something in there. You think? Well, maybe it's, and the refusal to identify single soldiers. And I didn't understand at the time, but no, we don't want to talk about single soldiers. Talk about boss, because boss is disposable. It's a marketing campaign. It's not a program.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the second you eliminate the word, the moment you eliminate boss, you can eliminate that command requirement. Cause that's, again, it wasn't a requirement. It's not a bullet point on an officer's OER, right? It's not on their evaluation, which any good GO probably is at least paying attention to that, right? And but the thing is that it ended up going in writing. That's all I can say. But it was they pitched this coin oh, this guy's just a lackey. He won't be able to do it. And I did it. Now, I wrote that in 2014. Do you know when it actually became part of 600-20? 2020. I wasn't even involved in the program at that point. And for years, right? So it finally came out in the revision of 600-20 in 2020.
To include the single soldiers.
Right. And included as a command requirement to actually pay attention to single soldiers in the planning process.
What would you say was one egregious thing that they were spending money on dependents? What would the people might think that's not the government's responsibility?
Food and IT.
What's that?
Well, food and IT requirements attached to mysterious things. There was it was a great program. I hate to beat up libraries, but when you have the Army libraries whose budget is dictated by a group decision that's navigated by this rotating head. So a lot of these things, and people the thing is that people don't understand it. And you get a general officer in there for 3 years, even by the third year after we look at, and I'm not going to bring up politicians, but you look at the time schedule of what it takes for the lurching speed of the machine for a president to come in and try to make change, right? You have a general officer who walks into a command and is just, you talk about drinking from a fire hose. There's north of 400 programs underneath MCOM.
It's a lot.
That's a lot of fire hoses.
Yeah.
And then you have these independent little pockets where they're like, hey, find me $5 million here. Hey, fine. And then, I wasn't the one. I was assisting in developing the budget and programming the money. But that was because I didn't have somebody there as a civilian other than Casey Hudson that was there helping me. And he was basically the program manager, but he wasn't getting that type of authority, which is, anyways, was never fair to him, and wasn't fair to me. But again, it was not about me. It was about the soldiers. And that's the thing is it wasn't fair to anybody. They put me in a position, and that's why I finally took the gloves off. I had a lot of people that were telling me, you wait 6 months, just hang out, because they knew.
Don't really do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just sit back and pay attention. And then Paul Roller, who was, such a dynamic leader as a civilian. And that's because he was a soldier prior. And, he and I had a lot of private conversations before he left. And I won't talk about that because those were private. And he helped me a lot in navigating once he was gone because he cared about the soldiers. And I think the current director is a little bit more worried about his personal needs. And that's very obvious if you look at his history from a chief.
How much influence do you think the White House has
on this?
Yeah.
I hope if you're listening, I mean, there needs to be an entire staff that walks in with probably some MPs, and there's probably some people that are going to walk out in cuffs. If taxpayers really understood, we would have to worry about a revolt on our own military installations. And I'm not kidding. And the NAF mafia they can find my address, right?
Explain what NAF is.
It's non-appropriated funds. And it's a great concept and amazing thing. And what it does, it's a huge, and it's an effective mechanism when it's not turned into
slush fund.
A slush fund. So to kind of explain what happens, if you have, for those out there, if I don't want to get into like TDAs and MTOs and stuff like that, but basically, so if you have a generalized command structure, so let's just say I'm hiring a GS-15, right? So you have a pay band. Let's just say, for ease of numbers, let's just say, and this is not realistic, I'm not quoting anything, so nobody come out there and say like, oh, that's not right. I'm just, for ease of use, let's just say there's a government employee. In fact, let's remove the rank. So government employee, they're getting paid $200,000 a year. They're APF employees, appropriated funds, right? So that's like the money gets approved in the budget, comes from Congress, October 1st. What NAF does is they say, well, we have these resource drivers. And the resource drivers work because they say, well, if a military installation has half their soldiers deployed, we can reduce and have reason to reduce the manpower. So they take that one $200,000 APF position and they say, give me 5 flex employees. So it's one requirement from an appropriated standpoint, but they put it through the UFM process. And then they are able to turn that into what they want. So they can rebuild and reevaluate the manpower model at the turn of a dime. Now, what does that do, though, when NAF employees are technically hourly employees? And then what happens when you're an hourly employee in a hazardous area that's deployed? Because aren't you working 24/7? So how many days in the federal structure of the OPM guidance, how many days does it take to become a double-time employee when you're working 24 hours a day? I'm not going to pitch coins at what they're doing overseas, but when you're talking about an MWR employee and not a soldier, a lot of those soldiers would probably be pretty upset to find out what those people they're standing next to are making.
Mm-hmm. I remember the MWR facility on the embassy in Baghdad, and it was like, we're going to do a fun run, and we're going to have a golf competition and chip on the general's lawn. It was like things like that. They would kind of make up once a week. They would have like a thing, but other than that, it was like handing out basketballs.
Or hot dogs.
Oh yeah,
or coffee.
Yeah,
if you're not having to pay
catered drunken parties were a lot of, particularly at the embassy. That was a shit show. State Department is.
I can imagine. So it just, those are the type of things, and I was lucky enough to have very close access, and I will not put his name out there, but I had a lot of great access to some really good empirical data, not anecdotal. And I wasn't ever somebody that got fed a line of shit and took it. I double checked for myself. And that was half of the reason why a lot of times when I really dug deep, then I really got pissed off, like with the suicide numbers.
What kind of numbers were you seeing them making? I know you said that how long does it take to make double time or triple time, and you're working 24 hours a day?
Well, if you're working 24 hours a day, by the third day, you're making double time, basically.
Oh, well.
Let's stretch it out. Let's just be nice.
And they're on a deployment.
Let's say who cares if it took 3 months to get to that point? That means that they're making double time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because they're an hourly employee. And oh, by the way, they cap out at a certain amount every year. I'm not going to talk about the number, but that doesn't mean they can't get paid out the remainder of what they're owed on the next October 1st. So that means you might have a ceiling at, let's say, somewhere in the 200,000s, but that doesn't mean that if you go over that you can't get paid out on October 1st of the next year.
Just out of the next year's budget.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, let's say you go overseas and you stretch that 6 month or 8 months to 18. I mean, how many years are you going to pay that 200 plus?
So
right
that
on
debt
October
never
1st.
ends. It just gets rolled into the next
Yeah.
year. And so
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure, I hope maybe that they've put some sort of, structure in there to change that a little bit, because I know it was an issue. And I do know somebody that looked into that was part of the auditing of that. So I hope somebody did something with that report somewhere, but I doubt it, unless maybe somebody close to home might be listening and know that they need to look. There's legitimate issues, and the thing is, I mean, what better place to do it other than away from DC?
for sure.
And again,
Out of sight, out of mind.
I know this has gotten I don't want to say off track, but it needs to be said. And I wasn't popular then, and I don't need to be popular now. The truth is, I mean, it's about the soldiers. Again, it's not about me. And,
Well, they're the foundation of the reason the whole thing exists. And being completely disregarded by, the self-serving of
the people that are supposed to be serving them. And it's like, I would hear, and, he would always say, the soldiers forget we're here for the soldiers. Since when?
Yeah. How have you shown that?
and I mean, it drove me crazy. And, I hate it. I don't want to say I hated, because it's a strong word, but it was so hard for me to not be able to talk to some of the senior leadership that I needed to talk to. And then it's like, when I did finally get access with some of those senior leaders, it was like I was talking to them every 5 minutes, and it was just like, Adam, come on. Sergeant Hughes, let's walk outside. Come on.
Why do you think they didn't want to hear you?
It wasn't that they didn't want to hear me. I mean, some of the stuff was just so ridiculous that, it was that ridiculous. And I mean, just like it was, I don't know if I 100% shared with you earlier, but the suicide numbers, that was just disgusting. You
remember what they were?
Yeah. So, and again, this I'm sure has changed, but I would not say that it's gotten lower.
Right.
So if you look at, and these are published numbers, I mean, they're now, you can look, 2006, all of a sudden, it seems like there's this screeching halt to the deep dive, in suicide numbers. 2004, there's this little downturn, and maybe we shouldn't be publishing all these numbers. But there's one facet of the way that they track suicides. You can't track PII or HIPAA, HIPAA information, but you can track, okay, this amount of soldiers that committed suicide have been diagnosed by one behavioral health or doctor with a psychological medical problem. Then you can track how many have been diagnosed 2 times, and then how many have been diagnosed 3 times and 4, but it actually stops at 3. But you look at those numbers, and it says, so out of the total population of people that successfully partake in a suicide event, back then the number was about 10% in people that had been diagnosed once. Then it jumps to between 20 and 30 for 2 diagnoses. And then at that 3rd diagnosis, though, you're north of 80.
Wow.
And
What
so,
type of diagnosis are you talking about?
behavioral health or psychological, like mental illness.
Just general PTSD or like bipolar or having a
and
manic episode, depression, anxiety?
the thing is they don't, in the earlier models, they do deep dive, but then they started saying, okay, well, it's PTSD, but I think that has a lot to do, and I'm going to say something really unpopular right now, but, and this, I want to get this straight because it's a VA issue and it's bullshit that they're talking about. The current president and Doge and all these other people are the ones that are doing this VA stuff with PTSD. That's bullshit. That happened in 2012. And that was a decision after a 25-year-long study where they determined, and this is like, I don't want to say who, because I don't know who the Surgeon General was at the time, but this DHA, everybody, VA, all that, they decided that there was not enough evidence that PTSD was a cause of people's military service. Now, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you, this was a decision that was made that long ago. Has nothing to do with now or anything that's been made in a decision that's been made in a vacuum in the last 15 minutes or the last 15 days or last 15 months. This is a long time ago. And those were legitimate concerns. Are these a reasonable and viable taxpayer expense? The decision was made no. And that shelf life, if you look at policy, it was written in stone. The shelf life was 2021. You can go back and look. The way that they shifted their discussion of PTSD and the frequency and how people that are claiming 90 to 100% PTSD, their frequency and how often they had to be evaluated, you can go back and look. It changed. And that's because they're increasing the frequency to see if you're full of shit. I mean, I'm not going to get into...
I think we all know somebody that made 100% claim in PTSD and never saw a round fired or never experienced anything outside the wire. And
absolutely,
they know that it's a subjective diagnosis that you can't disprove. And it's like tinnitus. You tell me my ears ain't ringing, right? Or impotence. You get 10% for just claiming impotence. Prove it.
Yeah.
Right? It's a few of those things are just immediate. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and the other one, the crazy thing to me is like sleep apnea, which, I mean, if I was somewhere in the decision pool, like, and I know why they made the decision, sleep apnea was easier to keep on because it's easier to disprove. Because you give somebody the percentage for sleep apnea and then you give them a machine and see if they use it. Right? Yeah. So it's easier to cancel from a policy standpoint rather than with PTSD. I mean, once you open that can of worms, it's really hard. I mean, and I mean, okay, just like you said, we all know somebody.
Sure.
I mean, that there's no way.
I know people that planned it before they went in.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was going through the process, right? I mean, they're just... Everybody's like, hey, man, make sure you... In fact, I was privy of that decision before I went through the process, and I made sure that I never talked at all because I knew that if I got any percentage for PTSD, that more than likely is going to be recalled.
What do you think? Why do you think, one, they're giving that away so easily, and do you anticipate it being recalled from...
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if that's changed. Again, like I said, I was...
So if you have a percentage based off PTSD, you may lose that.
If you're full of shit, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not too hard to look at somebody's background and say...
Por qué? Like what? From what? I know I've heard stories of people that didn't even finish boot camp.
Oh yeah, I mean,
claimed that they got PTSD from that and couldn't function and went home, or even contractors in Baghdad who wanted to stop contracting because they got pregnant and said she had PTSD, got 100%, got DBA, got paid out, and just went home and never left the embassy.
I mean, there's always one. But that goes back to like, even, I think there's just this massive God, it's just one of the things that drives me wild, and I mean, maybe this is more of a veteran issue, and I don't want to start poking at civilians that claim PTSD, but, you know, I really feel like they usurped the power on that.
What do you think the motivation was for, is it like the money's coming from anywhere? Fuck it. Why not? Like it almost seems like every government organization wanted reason to increase their budget, and any reason they could find was.
So I can tell you,
there's no consequence.
Yeah, well, that absolutely. Yeah. But the other thing is that, so I learned real early on, because of course, you know, me being Mr. Efficiency, right? Sitting back for 6 months watching all this money burning past, you know, I'm sitting here looking at a $24 million budget, all happy as an E5, you know, and I'm in a meeting and this guy goes, this is like $250 million. This is budget dust. The fuck you mean budget dust? I'm trying to fund, you know, 300,000 individuals on, you know, $24 to $26 million and try to give them a nickel at a time.
Yeah.
And you're saying $250 million is budget dust? What the fuck? Who are you? You know? And it's some lackey, you know, GS12 or NAF3 that's managing some contract for fucking Booz Allen, you know, and supposed to be dealing with, you know, resource drivers, but really it's just because the attractive woman that's in charge of that Booz Allen contract, or the civilian government worker, you know, is banging the brakes out of the chief behind the chief's wife's purview, you know? And, you know,
pillow talk.
I mean, pillow talk in the basement of the building.
Yeah.
You know?
In the hotel near.
You didn't even need to go to the hotel because there's a shower in the basement of the building.
Cancel my appointments this afternoon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, that's what happens when you marry one too.
No, I bet.
You get caught.
That's true.
But, you know, to go back to kind of your question, one of the things was, and I learned this trying to be Mr. Efficiency. I'm like, hey, if I got a $24 million budget, they're only spending about $500,000 a year. Maybe I can ask for more if I give this back to somebody else, right? And somebody pulled me aside and said, there's no such thing as cost savings here. Mm-hmm. There's funding reallocation. And if you send that brief forward, you will be on the first boat back to the sapper school you wanted to go to.
Really?
And so, yeah, I mean, there's...
You either get on board or you get kicked off the ship.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, and I think one of the aspects of self-preservation in that building is I had dirt on everybody. And it's all about who you can dime out, right? And...
that sounds a lot like DC.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing is I fucked up at a point where the funny story is, so I conducted the biggest training, and you can Google it, Boss Future Leader Training Forum or Boss Future Leader Forum. And it was like all the planets had aligned. I convinced the Sergeant Major of the Army daily to move the SMO and the board when they do the slotting for the nominative Sergeant Major. All 14 senior CSMs, all 14 4-stars, and the SMO all got a move to Orlando. We did this big, huge shebang. At the time, because of the Secret Service debacle in Vegas, we weren't allowed to do any conferences anywhere because they were getting hookers in Vegas.
The Secret Service were?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, you can Google that one. That one hit national news.
I believe you.
And so, we weren't allowed to travel. We weren't allowed to conduct conferences. And so I said, well, what if I conduct a training? Because we haven't had a training since 2010. And they said, no, because it's going to cost too much. I mean, you think about it, 4 people from every installation, if not maybe 5 or 6 from some, 75 installations. There's no way you can do that, right? And make it look reasonable. And I went to Miss Haney at the time, and man, I mean, honestly, one of the most empowering civilian SESs, director of the G9, absolutely amazing, phenomenal woman. Great mentor, and her husband. We always had a great time sitting down, chatting, and being honest with each other about things, but great leader. And we sat down, and she was absolutely empowering about it. And she said, I'll tell you what, find out what my cap is, and I'll sign it if you can get it done. You want to talk about Doge. So rather than going back to her first, I first went to the commanding general at the time, and I said, will you give me the authority to dictate travel? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Is it cost savings? Yep. Okay. I had to conduct that training for $500,000. And believe it or not, I did it stretched for 14 days. It was a 2-week-long training, and I did it for $500,000. Now, there might have been some sergeants majors that ballooned that number once we got to Orlando with some of the ridiculous, I mean, it made for a better time. And honestly, some of those engagements with some of those senior leaders, that's at the time, the senior enlisted advisor to the Joint Chief of Staff Troxel, John Wayne Troxel, was he was the USFK Sergeant Major at the time, Command Sergeant Major. And he was my roommate. And so we spent a lot of good time talking. I mean, amazing opportunity and access, right? That's what it all is. Mentoring and access to that type of leadership is what gave me the opportunity to drive on and drive forward. And really, it's what made me successful. Sergeant Major Hatfield, who was a G9 Sergeant Major at the time, Sergeant Major Daly at the Sergeant Major of the Army, Sergeant Major Jeffrey Hartless, who was the MCOM Sergeant Major, Command Sergeant Major Scott Schroeder, Davenport, all of them. Being able to be in the room with those senior leaders was absolutely priceless. And to have the support from them to say, I want to change the BOSS program from the BOSS program into a junior leadership program. And they got behind me, and it's already gone.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's like for a second we got away from that dichotomy in Germany in 1989, where the first sergeants thought they couldn't come into the rooms, and the privates said, get the fuck out of my room. We got away from that for about 5 seconds. And then I literally went up against my ETS date, my last day in the military. I went up, we did that training up until 2 days prior to my ETS. I literally flew back on Sunday, and I thought my ETS was on Tuesday. Well, it was the first time I had ever ETS'd, and so I didn't realize that when your date is that date, you fall off at midnight. So at 11 o'clock in the morning on Monday, my lackadaisical, but I think it was Sergeant Major Sims was the retention sergeant major at MCOM, and I got in the office and I sent him a message. I said, hey, I'm ready to do my reenlistment paperwork. He goes, okay, send me over your ERB and stuff, and I'll get the paperwork ready. You come over here, raise your hand. Raise your right hand, we'll do it. Okay, cool. Send it to him. He calls me back like 10 minutes later. Dude, you E-test tonight. You fall off the books tonight. And I went, what? He goes, yeah. And there's stuff, we got to do paperwork. So you need to come over here. And I'm like, I got to go into a brief. He's like, well, you might want to call somebody because you're going to fall off the books. And Fort Knox, which is who I have to arrange this with, they close in 2 hours. Oh, shit. So that did not happen. But again, because I had the support of leadership, probably the only time you'll ever see it, I actually came back on the military books within a month. And I was a direct report to the Sergeant Major at the G9, Sergeant Major Mike Hatfield. And then we worked on the program from there. But because I was gone for that month, They had
That's all it took.
So it took 10 minutes. It didn't take a month.
Wow.
And, and Joe and Josh, I mean, that's exactly what they wanted. They had the life skills funding now. They didn't need me. And, but the libraries needed it. And so did WCAP and, all these other programs, because I'm sure some of those WCAP soldiers are single, right? I mean, you talk about cooking the books. I mean, if you ran a corporation like this.
What advice would you give Elon and Doge? I mean, having kind of done what they're doing now 10 years prior.
No one will tell you the truth. No one.
How do you navigate?
Get everybody out of the room and go into the building at midnight.
I think you can see that they've battled that. I mean, they've had to put cuffs on people, board up doors, and escort people out and as well as I think there was a week or so ago, I saw all the Google searches for bleach bit and for
the funny thing is I wonder how they'll play into this with Fort Sam being part of a joint base. If I were a private trying to reverse architect that problem and put my pizza boxes in the ceiling instead of taking them out to the garbage because I'm a lazy ass.
Mm-hmm.
I would wonder if they'd be allowed on post.
You think they'd stop them at the gate?
I wouldn't doubt it.
How could they do that though? Like,
trust and believe. I'm
sort of like what you mean, where the wait them out. Like, who cares what the general says? We're just not going to do it.
I would think that there's probably, here's the one question. There's so much brass in San Antonio. I get it. The Pentagon, I mean, every corner of you get up in the D area, the whole different parts of that. There's a lot of brass, obviously, right?
Sure.
Outside of DC, you might want to count how many stars are in San Antonio, and not Fort Sam, all joint base. Because if it's part of a joint base, if they just lock down everything, who is running the installation at that moment? Who is the hat held with? Because that changes constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So it bounces between.
Much grayer area, huh?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean,
how long do you think until they look at San Antonio?
They're going to look.
I'm excited. I've enjoyed every moment of what's been going on. How have you reacted to seeing all of this? I mean, you're like, finally, fucking hell. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think, and I mean, honestly, right. And I don't want to get too deep into it because I don't want to put anybody in the middle, any crosshairs, but I mean, I got a pretty close connection to it. And, kind of going
like
back
you need to be over there with them.
No, I don't need to be there with them.
No, no, thank you.
No, it's not that. But I'll be honest. I can do enough from far enough away.
Yeah.
But sensitive items are always important to take accountability for. And it's
I feel like you're not talking about NVGs. That's what comes to my head. Like, everybody got there.
Yeah. No, I mean,
more sensitive.
We had an individual that lost their weapon, and so talk about like lead by leading, right? He took a tractor tire. And he decided to put us down in the front lean and rest with our weapons on our hands so that we could see the serial numbers on the M68 and on the M4. And we read them off and did a sensitive items check until he decided he was going to stop flipping the tire. And I think we probably got to about 3 or 4 hours. And then we started over again.
Oh, fuck.
There's some pretty interesting stories about that, but I mean, that's lost. That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, if you had some soldier now That had to even know what a sensitive item was, like maybe they get triggered. I mean, I don't want to get too far into that because, I mean, it's just, I don't know one thing, and I know that many people probably won't be a fan of this, but I mean, a lot of people blame a lot of things on General Milley and General Austin, or Secretary of Defense Austin. I have had interactions with both before they were in those positions, and I can tell you, more than likely, they were dealing with the lesser of two evils, even with the decisions that they were making. I mean, to sit there and it's just like to put all this on the president. You think the president's actually making these decisions? He's obviously, maybe it's his intent or vision to do something in that direction. He doesn't have the time to do all this. There's troves and troves and troves of people that are briefing him. And so a lot of people always say, like, who's making decisions in the military and in the government? It's the people creating the briefs, right? Like, you got to look further than that commander. The commander is just making a decision based off the data that they're getting put in front of them.
Yeah.
Right. And they trust those people. And dear God, that's why I would go out and get all my own info in San Antonio, because like literally, even locking the building, I don't know what that would do, because they'd hide stuff. Like, there's, that river runs so deep, so to speak. And I feel like I just keep on, maybe this is my 10-year venting.
Yeah.
Finally,
it's
coming out of my shell,
man. And it's something that's pretty relevant at the moment. We're seeing it all over every day with what Elon's doing and their daily posts of what they're finding, and just how fucking ridiculous and out of control that it is, which I feel like I've always known, and anyone who's worked for the government has always known, but it's like knowing that there's a mountain and then seeing that motherfucker. Like,
well, and I mean,
holy shit.
Everybody's always kept it an arm's length. Like,
and it's felt like such a machine and such a big thing that there's nothing you can do about it.
Oh, no.
And so, like, I remember being in Kabul and watching them kick $3 million worth of fiber optic off the back of a truck into a ditch and going to lunch, because fuck it, who cared? Nobody was paying attention. And we're going to pull out in 6 months anyway. So, like, the contract's paid for. We don't need to do the work. And trucks that were $500,000 that we waited to get, finally got them in, cut them in half with a K-tool, left them in the desert, burned them on fire. It's easier to just dump them than to ship them back, or having to turn in gear and they're breaking our scopes with hammers. I'm like, I would have paid you for that. Like, no, we're just going to break everything.
Or you have a company commander who signed off as a hand receipt at the first change of command inventories, signed off on a $20 million deficit, and never went and did the command 14%. And then whenever he goes to leave, he decides to say, oh shit, I'm still 20 million short. You know what? Let me get the C7 I got over here as a motor sergeant. I'm going to send him DRMO with the company credit card and buy all those things, and then change the NSN numbers on them so that they match my hand receipt.
Oh shit.
Now, that's not a flipple waiting to happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
out of control.
Yeah. And I mean, those type of things. I mean, and then you have to look at, does the punishment meet the crime? Or are they going to lose a month's pay? Okay. So maybe for an 03, right? That's like, let's be honest, 10 grand, right? And so they lose 10 grand. Yeah, they'll get it next month.
Most of the time, it seems like if you'll just resign, we won't do anything about it. And then you pop up somewhere else.
So, right. I mean, it's always, hey, screw up and then you'll just get promoted.
Yeah.
It's definitely that way in the civilian world with government civilians. I mean, the thing is they've made it so hard to get rid of people that you have to promote them to get rid of them.
Right.
And I mean, it's like
the only way to get them out of there.
Yeah. I mean, you get past your provisionary period, forget it. And, I mean, it's, again.
Talk to me about what this did to your mental state. Like, how were you managing all of this?
15 milligrams of Ativan, 3 Restoril, temazepam, about a gallon of booze a day.
Wow.
And then as I was going through the WTB, because I had so many injuries, they pitched 6 Percocet 10s on there. And
all this, those is like a daily thing. All of those things.
Gabapentin, and when I got home, I'll never forget. I got home, not home, but I got like back to my barracks after I was getting ready to get my exit meds. Right, I had to fill up a duffel bag. It's 32 different medications, not pills a day, medications. So some of those I took, like Ativan, 15 pills a day, and 8 prescribed, 7 that were as needed. And that's the other thing too. You're coming from 3 different types of doctors. You're going through that process, and
what were you dealing with that they were dosing you those things for? What were you telling them?
Actually, it was more my record, because I got hit in the face with a telephone pole. That was,
those are usually stationary. How did you get?
Well, yeah, that was a big, just training accident. But and I had 3 surgeries on my face, and
that explains it.
Yeah, exactly. I always joked with the major that was doing the surgery, and she was an Air Force major. I forget her name, but it was always funny because she said, do you have any cosmetic considerations in the last surgery? Because it was like this massive
Brad Pitt jawline. If you
actually, I said, I did say Brad Pitt, and she said the best I can do is a offshoot of Bruce Willis. And she said, you're halfway there, so it's not that hard.
Nice.
But no, it was the last surgery was pretty gnarly, actually, and I had a graft done from my ribs and the cadaver, and
wow.
And it's even separating again, it seems like. So I'm probably getting ready to have another one. That last one was done in 17, 16, somewhere there.
So it wasn't all just like emotional stress. You had some legitimate injuries and pain that you were suffering from.
So when I first started with Ativan, of course, just like everyone else, I started with Ambien. And then I started placing a bunch of Amazon orders in the middle of the night. And
you're not supposed to stay awake after you take that shit.
Yeah, well, that's what they tell you.
That's when the fun begins.
I don't remember. And then so quickly moved off that. And then I remember they gave me this medication, Remeron. And actually, I had started taking a benzodilator, and I think Valium was where they started me on the benzos. But then like right in the middle of it, I randomly got this doctor, one of my doctor's visits, and it was not my normal doctor. And she's like, oh my God, they can't give you benzos. Let's just switch you to Remeron because it's not a benzodilator. And I mean, it was like somebody gave me LSD. I went back the next day and I said, I'm not dreaming. No, I'm not taking this medication. And so my regular doctor put me back on Valium. And then once we realized, how to manage it, I'm not going to say the doctor, but I mean, he definitely knew I was drinking. I mean, everyone knew I was drinking. Maybe they didn't know the level. But that, I mean, addiction is such a personal item, and it's different for everybody. There's no one size fits all. AA did not work for me. And I realized the moment AA didn't work for me was the first time I got stressed out while I was attending an AA meeting. Right. And,
what other things did you try other than AA? What?
I ended up going to a private program. And the interesting thing was I was still taking Ativan, and this is at the point where I was drinking 3 gallons every 2 days. And really nobody, I mean, obviously people knew, but I wasn't like bumbling drunk. Obviously at some point I was, but cause that's why I ended up in a coma. But, I was involved in this program, and it was a 45-day program, not a large program. It was just a couple people. And I got down to day number 42, and they had an individual come in. And it was not solely military based. And so this individual started talking to me in Farsi on purpose.
And
And
you speak Farsi.
no, but I understood it, right? So I understood what he was saying. And he was just trying to aggravate me, obviously. And the thought that was going through my head was that we got 3 days left and I can go have an Ativan. And at that moment, I went, holy shit, I don't have a drinking problem. I have an Ativan problem.
Yeah.
And then because, then I started like really working on that fact the last 3 days that I was there, like, oh my God, I do. I have an Ativan problem. And Ativan was giving me permission to drink. And I mean, that's an excuse, but I mean, in reality, the Ativan was...
It's how we rationalize things to ourselves.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Particularly in addiction.
Yeah. And it gave me permission to move forward. Right. I mean, and I, the first time that I had any type of stress in my life when I was going the AA route, right, I called one of my mentors and, bitching and griping and venting and like, this, that, the other, and I don't know why, AA isn't doing shit for me, but what do I do? And he goes, I don't know why you stopped drinking in the first place. Fuck, you know what? You're right. Hung up the phone and walked straight to the store. And
this was a friend you were talking to?
Yeah. Well, mentor actually. So, yeah. But I mean, and again, talk about normalized behavior within the military, right?
Totally.
I mean, hey, why did you stop drinking? And so, those things all were real. I'm lucky I'm alive, the coma, the cardiac arrest, the paralysis, and then,
was that all from drinking or from medications or
well, so the coma was, yes, the coma was because of drinking.
So you passed out one day and just...
I stood up. Yeah. I was drinking a cup of coffee, stood up, bam, passed out, hit my head, went to the hospital. And I'll never forget the ER doc came in and looked at me and said, your liver's shutting down, your organs are shutting down. We don't know what's going on, but you are, you're bloating like crazy and your organs are starting to shut down. The only thing we can do to save your life is to put you into chemically induced coma. And I said, I'll see you on the flip side, doc, right? Because I had just finished my last handle.
Wow.
And
how long were you down for?
7 days. Well, it was like, I think I was in the hospital. It was like right at the beginning of COVID, funny enough. And so I was in like a bubble. So I ended up having to stay there longer than I needed to, but technically in a coma, 6 days. So, which isn't, I wasn't in a coma for 10 months, but then,
did you have any memories?
No,
nothing, just totally
I was
a
so
blank
hammered.
spot.
Yeah.
Even throughout the 6 days, you didn't remember anything, just woke up and it's like a time capsule.
Yeah. I mean, I
always wondered if you could hear people or if there was nothing.
And I mean, this maybe goes back to when my mom died, but I mean, I haven't dreamt in a long time. And I know everybody dreams, right? But
I didn't dream for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, the memory of dreaming, it doesn't happen for me. And so, whatever disconnect I have, and then whatever they screwed up in the paralysis process with my frontal cortex and my cerebellum.
I medicated with cannabis for a long time, and I stopped dreaming until I did a psychedelic, and then I never touched cannabis again. But I dream like vivid movies again, like I was a child.
Have you
completely reworked my brain?
It's interesting you say that because actually, I guess I have my first question for you. You familiar gentleman Dan Orth? He's a soldier.
Dan Orth.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
No. I actually helped him typeset his book, The Cost of One Man's War. Great poetry book, and not trying to plug Dan, but
Sure, yeah, plug away.
It was a project I assisted him with, and he's doing great things. He sold a lot of copies. He's great poet, and actually, Sarah Invader Girl, she did all the artwork inside of it. If I'm sure people are familiar with Sarah's work, and Invader Girl, I'm sure.
I don't know, but I'm sure some people do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's worth checking out. Check it out.
She did all the artwork, and anyways, great book. But he's really tied into that psychedelic movement, and even like the legal aspect of it, and trying to push it for veterans. And so definitely
that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, there's a resource there if anybody. I don't want to put him on blast, but
I think it's picking up so much in the veteran community, partly because it's effective and it works, and partly because who the fuck is going to tell us no?
Right.
Like, you sent us 30 years to this war, and you could at least get the fuck out of the way while we try to heal.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and to talk for 2 seconds about just Dan's page. He has an Instagram. It's called the Warriors Creel, and
I'll look that up.
Yeah, definitely.
Warriors Creel.
It's CREEL.
Creel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but definitely, I've been interested in that, but I think so much for me about the psychedelics, I really wonder if I'm tapping back into, and I think I'm already living on borrowed time. Like, I mean, I'm like my buddy Jake, who I lived in the barracks with, and he's, works on a couple different projects with me now. One of my best friends. After the coma and then the cardiac arrest, he's like, dude, you don't have any more lives. Cut it out.
Well, I mean, luckily there's many different modalities, right?
Yeah.
And they each have different functions within the body and different effects on it. And so a lot of times, particularly with things like ibogaine, there can be a cardiac risk. It can cause like a spike in blood pressure, things like that. But there's others that don't. And I think it would just be worth, I know there's doctors that specifically are involved or understand the pharmaceutical aspect of that, and based off of whatever health or medications that you're on could tell you what would or wouldn't be safe to do. And things like psilocybin, there's no known overdose limit. Right? The only real problem would be, do you have maybe a history of psychosis, or people with extreme bipolar, or if they have blood pressure issues? If you have a really bad time managing your blood pressure, it can increase your blood pressure, and that could be a risk because it's a 4-hour experience, right? Or ibogaine's a 24-hour experience and could be difficult on your heart if you had a cardiac issue. But other stuff like MDMA or ketamine don't have that effect. Or it would just be, if it's something that you're interested in, and I can help you make that contact with a doctor, a pharmacist, that's what he does. Is evaluate people, and he can't give a recommendation, but he could tell you what would be safe or not to do. So if it's something that you're interested in, definitely look into it, because it's not a one size fits all, and there's a whole bunch of different modalities out there that, like, there's ketamine clinics here in Austin.
Yeah, I mean, we see them all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
that's the one thing that the FDA's already played with and deemed as safe. And I carried it in Afghanistan. Yeah. And you may put someone in a K-hole, but it doesn't affect their respiration. It doesn't affect their heart rate, which is why it's a safe sedative. And you disassociate and have this just incredible experience. I had a psychologist that I used to see, a therapist, that quit his practice after he broke a rib off a horse, and they gave him ketamine, and he's like, that was the most incredible experience of my life. I'm no longer going to sit around and talk to people. I'm going to see what this is and get involved in this, because this was life-changing.
Wow.
And yeah, it's been amazing.
And that's, I think there's so many things that we can benefit from. And I think, at least with an addiction, one of the things that I don't want to say we, but I see people doing
Mm-hmm.
from a veteran to a veteran. And it's not easy to get those phone calls or get the text message, but you can tell, right?
Oh yeah.
You can tell when something like talking to somebody 2-3 times a week, and then all of a sudden 4-week span.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, so when am I going to get the text message or the phone call from the ER?
Yeah.
Right. And then, the thing is that as veterans, unfortunately, we I don't want to say strive for excellence, but it's like we feel like it's okay to beat somebody up about that. And not that it's okay and we don't need to condone it, right? And I'm going to say another unpopular thing, go figure, but one thing I really want to talk about and that I don't think is heard that often, and I know I was never popular for saying it, but I mean, let's look at the semantics of the term Suicide Awareness Month.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're reminding people that all the cool kids are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, look, the suicide numbers are on the up. Let's run out and make sure that, veterans are safe. Suicide month, the day before or the month before we go into the end of the year, all the holidays. Who does that? I have some serious thoughts about whoever decided to plan Suicide Awareness Month. I mean, was it initially identified as the month where we could influence the most suicides, or deflate the most suicides? I mean, because really,
let's call it Veteran Connection Month.
Yeah, I mean, there's even even if you just called it Call Your Battle Buddy Month,
Totally.
Whatever. I mean,
Totally.
Because that's what we all talk about anyways, is call your buddy, call your
Kill Yourself Awareness Month.
And I'm not trying to say that there needs to be this big semantics change. I'm just, the optics on that, right?
Totally.
Yeah, and I mean, sitting on some of the suicide awareness panels for the entire Army, I said those things, we might be reminding them that it's an option.
Sure.
And, you're telling them that, hey, by the way, just a reminder, this year, even more cool kids are doing it.
Mm.
That's, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just saying maybe we need to take another look at the way we treat that. And I think some of the realities of suicide, look at the numbers of how many people that commit suicide are either inebriated or it was an accident caused because of some sort of substance that was involved. And that could be any substance. I mean, even water, right? But I'm just saying that, if there's an accidental suicide, what were those purposes? I mean, after, some of the Fort Hood incidents, Fort Cavazos, whatever. I mean, all these things, but you look at some of those, a lot of those would come across my desk and be like, hey, we need to look and see if this is actually a single soldier problem. They had suicides that were happening because single soldiers in foreign areas didn't have access to primary care. And that was a GAO issue, the one I spoke about earlier, that dependents were getting priority over the single soldiers, and it was causing either, detrimental health outcomes, or people were literally they were having, I don't want to, say that they were committing suicide directly because of that, but I mean, it was a compounding issue.
Sure.
And, when you're concentrating on making sure that those single soldiers that are reading books to kids are getting their lunches paid for, I don't think we're talking about suicides, or we're talking about making sure that single soldiers have access to the sufficient medical care in OCONUS locations. And that's just one GAO issue. I mean, that wasn't the only one. I mean, brings to mind like a massive military planning process. And I'm sure there's no way that, and when I said food and IT, Booz Allen, Hamilton is where Doge needs to go first, especially in San Antonio. I mean, the money that was spent on those contracts and the resource drivers that they drive. I mean, you talk about happy to glad. That's not even happy to glad. That's like clear to transparent.
Hmm.
I mean, yes, there's some resource drivers there, but that's like saying, you know what, Zach, if you hand me 2 apples, how am I going to handle them? Well, they're 2 fucking apples. I mean, and I get it, there's need to shift those resource drivers, but it's not all it's cooked up to be. And if people were held accountable, you wouldn't need that shit.
Hmm.
And in a world of automation, we don't need admins of admins of admins of one chief to talk about when we're going to have a meeting about a meeting. And that is just a classic. I mean, 30-minute meetings and 2 minutes is spent on an agenda. Again, I go back to the same word, is disgusting. And that's where a lot of the substance abuse was my muse.
Hmm.
I mean, and I walked everywhere. That was like my big thing. I always walked off my drunk, so to speak. Right. But, I would always take time to go and walk and, think about things. And there was never enough time. I mean, and so every day, I mean, I worked a lot of hours to try and figure out a lot of those problems. And I would get down to core issues, and I'd go to other soldiers. I'd go to my subordinates, and I would go to my peers and try to talk to them about it. I lived in the barracks, right? I mean, how else do you know what to do unless you live? I know there were periods when I didn't live in the barracks, but that was very short-lived. But I needed to make sure that I lived amongst the soldiers that I was representing. And I think maybe G9 and MCOM needs to think about that if you're going to expect, that's like, you might as well just put a married person in the position from day one, right? I mean, why even have the position? And that's the other thing. There were some serious talks when I left that position that there would never be anybody after me that had the brevity, authority, or insight and oversight that I had. I had my hand in way too many, too many irons in the fire, and my hand in too many, I don't want to say cookie jars, but I definitely had grasp on a lot of different commanders' attention because I told them the truth, and they hadn't heard it, and then we were trying to convert the boss program into life skills, and that was a big winner, right? My whole thing was get rid of the name, just change boss to life skills. And again, like that was like where they won over the crowd, so to speak, because, their opinion to, or the comment to the masses was as soon as I left the room, Hughes wants to get rid of the boss's name. And that's what the soldiers came up with. So, are you going to let this one person bastardize, and I mean, I know everybody was in the room. I had an AAR after, it was either after the first week of the training in Orlando. And I said, all right, everybody, we spent a little bit of time here. Give me 3 up, 3 downs. And, and let's talk about this. And somebody stood up and said, you're unapproachable and you're an asshole. I mean, okay. But, I really took that to heart, even to today. I mean, I make sure that I'm accessible and that I might not always seem like I'm approachable, but I mean, I'll talk about anything with you. We might not agree, but I mean, that's conflict, and conflict creates progress.
A lot of people can't handle conflict, though.
Yeah. And, I am definitely, and I've said this, there's a couple coined terms. One, I definitely enjoy ripping off the Band-Aid. I think it puts everything out there. And you can tell a lot. You can read a room real fast if you piss somebody off. Two, and I learned this from a mentor, but in the military, the world is a democracy to an extent. And that would be the biggest advice I could give anybody trying to lift the skirt and turn the page. There's going to be some hard truths, and you're going to piss a lot of people off. You're going to fire a lot of people. You're going to rack and stack people. There's going to be some hard decisions to make. But the thing is, it's not even about the greater good. And even if there was a process where you took those people and said, okay, here's an intermediary time period where you need to make a decision, but you kind of like the Office Space, like, let's talk about what you do.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need to do that. That's extra time. That's extra bullshit. You can probably, I'm going to go back to the Blue Force tracker that MCOM tried to implement. And they tried to take the Blue Force tracker, exactly what everybody's thinking about as a soldier, because it's the same program. And they tried to get it to where civilians had to log in at their computer. Yeah. They spun that wheel for, I want to say, like, it was just kind of a, dark room discussion for like 2 years, and it just never materialized. They tried, they did a pilot, this, that, the other, probably spent $50 billion on it, it's just like Vermont Systems. RecTrack 10.3. Oh, well, we rolled out 10.1 10 years ago. And then all of a sudden we find out all of Europe, the entire region, took the entire RecTrack's a POS system, point of sale system for the MWR. Excuse me. Anyways, so they launched this entire point of sale system for MWR facilities, all of Europe. They go over to do an accountability check. They find all of the point of sale systems inside one building, collecting dust covered. I mean, and that's accountability.
Yeah.
And then they're going to turn around, well, Dan, and this, anyways.
There's a whole lot of cleaning up to do, and I'm enjoying thoroughly watching them do it.
The thing is at the rate that they're going, they might be able to get it done in 4 years, but I doubt it.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
Really, I mean, I feel like they've been going pretty fast, but I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as big as the government is, which is very big, and it spans across the whole world.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, and then a lot of things are, under the guise of like disclosure. Oh, like we don't want people to know what happens at, White Sands or Dugway or Kwajalein, and, all these mysterious places that nobody knows about. And, I'm not trying to get into like alien disclosure BS, because I mean, whatever, everybody's going to believe whatever they want to believe. I will say, though, I had my own experience in Korea, not with like aliens walking into my barracks room, maybe at some point in time when I was that hammered, but it was probably just one of my roommates or Katusa. And Lee, Jason Lee, he probably walked in on me a few times when I was spaced out, or after a political Korean dinner. But yeah, actually, and I saw a military fixed wing plane with its lights off chasing something over the top of Camp Carroll, which is in the basin of a caldera. Like, there's definitely a chasing event going on, and it was not like a North Korean, biplane. This was a Army fixed wing out of Camp Humphreys that was following something, and it was quite heavily tracking some things over the top of that installation. And my first conspiracy was when Kim Jong-il died. And like his theory, proven theory,
Okay.
was weather manipulation when Kim Jong-il died. And so I won't talk about mission or anything like that, but so we went to the field. We went into Red Cycle. And so we, moved forward with our mission as an air defense unit. And I'll never forget. So they said, everybody line up in the motor pool. Okay. So everybody got in line, convoys all ready to go, everything. And then within like 10 minutes, all the clouds roll in, right? And then turn around. Everybody says, okay, get ready. Let the convoy leave. All the convoy, all commanders leave. They go in their directions they go. And then 10 minutes later, all the cloud cover gone.
Interesting.
Like total show of force, right? And I mean, conspiracy, well, we were in the middle of a caldera, so it'd be pretty easy to manipulate cloud cover. And
Wow.
I mean, I'm not gonna get into like weird, stupid stuff like that, but I mean, it again, kind of getting back to like ripping the Band-Aid off, right? I mean, if we have the capability to, deal with some of the realities of like what they're starting to at least talk about with like JFK.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's some serious stuff out there that I think people need to know. And, maybe we start with the funding, right? I know that whenever I went through basic training, we had an amnesty box. Maybe they give the G9 and Josh Gwynn and Joe Kavanaugh an amnesty box for about 5 minutes.
I'd love to see something like that. And I'm sure there are people that are quietly reporting and whistleblowers that feel just like you did, that are just, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And aren't drinking the Kool-Aid and want to see it fixed and are willing to start pointing fingers at places to look and shining lights.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like this is an awesome time to be alive and to see what happens, and an opportunity to get our government under control and maybe back on track and in the service of the American people again. And if not, I worry what will replace it, and that they'll seal it up to a point that you can never do it again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at, there's a couple key points, and I mean, I'm not telling any of the people that understand the geopolitical arena, anything they don't already know. But if you, from a cognizant standpoint, if you are willing to read, you need to look at the WHO, Interpol, and the way that the UN work together now, as of November of last year, with some rush to policy.
I thought you were going to say Israel, but
No. But then you need to go look back and see what some of the bullet points of the 2025 plan are, and look at exodus from the UN and what does that really mean. Look at the UN Constitution and read it. Like, understand that was done and signed without our, like, I don't want to say, that thing marched forward in 1947 without our concurrence, but it's written like, if you don't sign this and you stay part of the UN, you're compliant. Right? And, I'm not asking you to read a history book. Just go back and look. You can Google it. It takes 2 seconds. And the United Nations Constitution of the General Assembly is not that difficult to read.
okay.
It's 1-2 pages and, probably size 16 font. It was done on a typewriter.
Nice.
So, I mean, but, people don't know those things, and they don't know, like, where to look, what how they interact with each other. And that's what we need to arm everyday citizens with, because if they don't know, then, I mean, what good is it to get angry? Because now, I mean, you're just distracted.
Totally. Well, Adam, we're out of time, man, but this has been an awesome, I've enjoyed this conversation thoroughly. Thank you for coming in and sharing all of this. I think that it's right on par with what people need to hear and need to know about, because we are looking now and they are shining lights in places. And I hope that they look at San Antonio.
They got to lift the skirt there.
Yeah.
They got to look underneath Gunshed Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There's a big building there. So,
well, thank you, man. Thank you for sharing. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Definitely. Yeah, have a good one.
Stay zero.
Yeah.